Let's continue our discussion of gender by looking at how anthropologists explore the relationship between gender and power. Of course, gender is a point of significant power struggles. Many cultures across the globe, including in the West, are patriarchal or male-dominated. In patriarchal cultures, feminine traits are often discriminated against. Women face significant challenges in the modern world simply because they are women. Early anthropologists fell back on the idea that male dominance was rooted in biology. Yet anthropologists become more aware of our own bias. We too come from a patriarchal culture. Gender stratification refers to the unequal distribution of wealth, power, privilege, and opportunity between men and women. Gender stereotypes, based on cultural gender ideologies, underlie and support gender stratification. Gender stereotypes are preconceived notions about differences between men and women in proper roles, behaviors, and attitudes. Pause for a moment to look at the comparative list of traditional gender stereotypes. Do these correspond to the way you've been taught to think of gender? Gender ideologies are cultural ideas that legitimate gender roles, stratification, and customary behavior. In U.S. culture, it's often believed that men and women are inherently different. But research has shown that biology nonetheless influences gender roles, but it does not completely determine them. More than 27% of women and 11% of men have experienced sexual violence, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in their lifetime and experienced intimate partner violence related impact. Commonly reported negative impacts were feeling fearful, 62% of women and 18% of men, concern for their safety, 57% of women and 17% of men, and symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, 52% of women and 17% of men. The stereotype that men are aggressive and violent, women are passive, staying largely at home and not moving, can fuel gender violence. With power on the line, gender norms have often been enforced through violence. Broadly speaking, gender violence refers to any form of violence that is shaped by the gender identities of the people involved. Young women at colleges are more frequently victims of sexual assault and rape than all women combined, and also women in the same age bracket who are not in college. Many Americans tend to think of sexual assault and rape as crimes committed by strangers. But of all sexual assaults and rapes that occur to women in college, 90% are committed by someone the victim knew, not a stranger, but a boyfriend, a classmate, or a colleague. The majority of these incidents occur in the person's residence. These staggering statistics speak to a massive power imbalance between men and women on college campuses. What does rape culture tell us about an American culture that allows this dynamic to continue? Those individuals who do not fit standard gender norms are also often the subject of violence. Gay men, lesbians, and bisexuals can be targets of homophobia. Homophobic violence can be both physical and verbal. Transgender people are especially vulnerable to gender and sexually based violence. Impoverished Americans are often depicted as being poor by choice as a result of their own actions and faults. The structural aspects working against them, such as lack of access to education and basic resources, are not considered. The concept of structural violence seeks to explain how political, economic, and cultural structures result in the occurrence of avoidable violence, often seen as the deprivation of basic human needs. As Paul Farmer puts it, structural violence is one way of describing social arrangements that put individuals and populations in harm's way. The arrangements are structural because they're embedded in political and economic organization. They're violent because they cause injury to people. Medical anthropologist Seth Holmes notes that much structural violence in the United States today is organized along the fault lines of class, race, citizenship, gender, and sexuality. Kenneth Guest defines structural gender violence as gendered societal patterns of unequal access to wealth, power, and basic resources such as food, shelter, and health care that differentially affect women in particular. Inequalities of wealth, power, privilege, and access to cultural resources are stratified by gender, poverty, hunger, and poor health. Such inequalities affect victims' lives in violent and painful ways. According to Kotak and Kazaitis, women head over half of U.S. households with incomes below the poverty line. Feminine poverty has been a trend in the U.S. since World War II, but has accelerated in recent decades. In 1959, female-headed households accounted for just 1/4 of the American poor. Since then, that figure has more than doubled. The feminization of poverty and its consequences in regard to living standards and health are widespread even among wage earners. Many American women continue to work part-time for low wages and meager benefits. On average, married couples earn over twice the household income and are much more secure economically than single mothers. About half the female poor are confronting temporary economic crisis caused by divorce, disability, or death of a husband. The other half is more permanently dependent on the welfare system or on friends or relatives who live nearby. In face of gender stratification and gender ideologies that undervalue women, many women and men around the world have begun to work to change the norms and cultural values that subjugate women. They do not seek to eliminate gender, but rather to ensure that all genders are treated equally. Globalization can spur people of all genders to migrate to new countries in search of ways to support themselves and their families. In particular, tens of millions of women travel to new cities and countries each year in search of increased job opportunities. Many women immigrants to North America, Asia, and the Middle East take on care work jobs such as nannying and babysitting, elder care, cooking, cleaning, and so on. Objects that both men and women use are often gendered. For example, razors that are functionally the same are marked differently for men and women. Other examples are pink and blue toothbrushes, Halloween costumes marketed for girls versus boys, different kinds of presents for Mother's Day and Father's Day. Gendered objects reinforce cultural ideals that women and men are distinct. They marginalize those who don't fit gender norms and shape gender ideologies and ingrain them in children. Next time you go to the pharmacy, compare gendered versions of the same product. Are the ingredients the same or different? What about the price? Try buying a product promoted for a different gender. How do you feel at the checkout counter, and why is that? What are your culturally shaped expectations for yourself as a gendered being? Do you see yourself as a woman, a man, or somewhere along the gender continuum? Can you recall some of the ways that you were taught gender by your parents and kin, teachers, preachers, coaches, peers, television, and social media? Or have these become so taken for granted that they're invisible? How, as a cultural being, do you think about gender diversity?